Rigathi Gachagua's rise in Kenyan politics was sudden and divisive. Once a little-known district officer and then an aide to Uhuru Kenyatta, he vaulted to deputy president through sheer ambition and regional power brokering. His confrontational style and claims of defending his community made him a polarizing figure but also a political force. Gachagua's ascent was shadowed by a massive corruption case, billions allegedly siphoned through a web of companies. Yet after taking office, all charges were abruptly dropped, fueling accusations of state capture and impunity. His tenure began under a cloud of suspicion, setting the tone for a deeply divided administration. With legal troubles behind him, Gachagua's rhetoric grew more divisive. He pushed the idea that government appointments and resources should only go to communities that voted for the ruling coalition, stoking ethnic tensions. His abrasive style and tribal appeals alienated many, raising fears of deepening polarization. Critics warn he's undermining democracy, using state power to punish rivals and silence dissent. The Gachagua Effect now symbolizes a politics of vengeance and exclusion, threatening Kenya's fragile unity. His leadership is a stark reminder of how quickly democratic norms can unravel. Gachagua's roots lie in Kenya's provincial administration, a system built for control. As a district officer in the autocratic era of President Daniel Arap Moi, Gachagua learned to wield authority decisively, prioritizing order over consensus. This background shaped his authoritarian style and intolerance for opposition. His rise was calculated, leveraging state networks and a reputation for uncompromising administration. Critics trace his confrontational politics to this era, where enforcing decrees trampled democratic debate. The legacy of repression from the Moi system still echoes in his approach to power. Gachagua's career shifted when he became personal assistant to Uhuru Kenyatta, gaining access to the heart of power. He managed grassroots mobilization and strategy-building influence within the Mount Kenya region. This role transformed him from bureaucrat to political insider, sharpening his skills in backroom politics. Ironically, he later turned against the Kenyatta camp, joining Ruto in a dramatic political realignment. His insider knowledge became a weapon in the 2022 campaign, fueling bitter rivalries. The alliance that launched his career ultimately became the target of his fiercest attacks. Even as Gachagua's political star rose, investigators built a corruption case against him. He was accused of masterminding a scheme to siphon billions from public coffers through proxy companies and rigged tenders. The DCI traced over 7 billion shillings through his accounts, with evidence of money laundering leading to asset freezes. Gachagua denied all charges, claiming political persecution, and cast himself as a victim of a weaponized justice system. Despite compelling evidence, prosecutors abruptly dropped the corruption case just 2 months after he became deputy president, a move critics say was tied to his elevation as deputy president, raising concerns of a political quid pro quo. This sparked public outrage and skepticism. Critics questioned how a seemingly strong case could suddenly collapse. Many saw it as executive interference, undermining the fight against impunity. The Law Society of Kenya warned of a dangerous precedent, fueling perceptions of a two-tiered justice system. While Gachagua celebrated vindication, the cloud of suspicion remained for many Kenyans. As the 2022 presidential election approached, the selection of William Ruto's running mate became critical. The Kikuyu vote within the greater Mount Kenya region was undeniably the indispensable prize. Rigathi Gachagua leveraged the Kikuyu vote and positioned himself as the only viable option, engineering a narrative that he alone could command the region's voters. He communicated that the Kikuyu vote was not guaranteed, strong-arming support by threatening to withhold his region's backing. The price, by implication, was the deputy president's slot for Gachagua himself. He leveraged his reputation, arguing that his confrontational style was needed to rally the region against President Uhuru Kenyatta. He was, in essence, holding the coalition's electoral fortunes hostage. He presented himself as the sole guarantor of regional unity, the only leader with the grit to stand up to the so-called deep state and protect the community's interests. This approach was a form of political blackmail. Gachagua forced the coalition's hand, ensuring that his name would be on the presidential ticket. It came at a significant cost, sowing seeds of division within the nascent alliance. Rigathi Gachagua's path to becoming Ruto's running mate was a testament to his mastery of strong-arm politics. His public persona was carefully cultivated to be that of a fearless warrior, unafraid to speak uncomfortable truths. Gachagua stepped into the vacuum as the ultimate political enforcer for the Ruto camp. In public forums and private meetings, he consistently outmaneuvered his rivals by being louder, more assertive, and more confrontational. Gachagua embraced a populist, no-holds-barred approach, attacking the Kenyatta family, earning him the reputation of a risk-taker. This strongman persona was a key part of his negotiation strategy within the Kenya Kwanza coalition. By building a fanatical following, he ensured that his political base was non-transferable, giving him immense leverage. Gachagua proved that the ability to mobilize a fervent base and intimidate opponents could be more valuable. He bulldozed his way onto the ticket by making himself too big to ignore and too risky to sideline. When William Ruto announced Rigathi Gachagua as his running mate, the carefully constructed facade of unity within the Kenya Kwanza coalition began to crack. The decision sidelined moderates who had backed Senator Kithure Kindiki, who was seen as a stabilizing force. This created mistrust, with fears that Gachagua's style would alienate communities and prioritize ethnic politics. Leaders worried about a Kikuyu-Kalenjin political duopoly, with Gachagua as gatekeeper for Mount Kenya's interests. This division had a lasting impact, creating tension within the government. Gachagua's forceful ascension demonstrated his philosophy: power is taken, not given, defining his relationships with coalition partners. Once in office, Rigathi Gachagua introduced a political philosophy that sent shockwaves across the nation: a shareholding system. In this view, the government was akin to a private corporation where appointments and resources should be distributed based on political investment. Communities that voted for the Kenya Kwanza administration were the majority shareholders and deserved the lion's share of the dividends. This was a radical departure from equitable service delivery for all Kenyans. The shareholding statement became a recurring theme, a doctrine he sought to normalize. This rhetoric immediately split public opinion, drawing a line between pragmatic politicians and those who viewed it as a constitutional abomination. Critics saw it as a declaration that the government would actively discriminate, creating a two-tier system of citizenship. It undermined the notion of a united Kenya, replacing it with competing ethnic interests. This created a confusing signal, cementing his reputation as a divisive figure more interested in rewarding his base than governing the nation. Rigathi Gachagua has chronically portrayed the Mount Kenya region as victims of national exclusion. He has cultivated a false narrative of victimhood, positioning himself as the region's sole defender. In his speeches, he habitually paints a false and misleading picture of a community that has been politically betrayed and economically marginalized. This narrative ignores the region's significant economic and political influence. By framing an entire Mount Kenya region as victims, Gachagua shifts focus from his personal controversies to a false collective grievance. This tactic consolidates his base, uniting them against a false common enemy. The long-term danger is its corrosive effect on national unity, deepening ethnic polarization. While securing his personal political position, it fosters a divided nation where ethnic identity tramples national citizenship. Rigathi Gachagua's public style is perhaps his most defining and controversial characteristic. He wielded the office of the deputy president like a bully pulpit, employing an abrasive, confrontational, and often inflammatory communication style. He rarely missed an opportunity to attack his political opponents in harsh and personal terms, often resorting to derisive language and mockery. His actions suggested a belief that the executive branch should operate without checks and balances, a dangerous proposition in any democracy. Gachagua became notorious for his use of class warfare rhetoric, often pitting the so-called hustlers against the dynasties. It reinforced his image as a strong, divisive leader who is unafraid to speak truth to power, even when he is the one in power. However, this approach comes at a tremendous cost. It coarsens public discourse and erodes respect for democratic institutions. Upon taking office, Rigathi Gachagua positioned himself as the champion of the downtrodden farmer, particularly within his Mount Kenya heartland. He declared war on cartels in the tea, coffee, and dairy sectors, promising to restore profits to producers. This resonated with thousands of farmers. The promises were grand, and expectations soared. Gachagua convened conferences and issued warnings to those sabotaging the agricultural economy, promising reforms. However, as time passed, the gap between pronouncements and reality became impossible to ignore. Farmers reported little change. The promised revolution failed to materialize, leaving disappointment. The war on cartels seemed more public relations than policy. The campaign was all noise and no substance. Farmers were left with the same struggles, a testament to a policy of rhetoric but zero results. Key policy pronouncements from the deputy president proved hollow. Gachagua's call for the revival of the Shamba system, allowing farming in public forests, sparked controversy. Dismissing environmental warnings, he championed it as a solution to food insecurity. Promises of affordable credit and lower farm input costs were vaguely implemented or non-existent. Farmers continued to struggle with high prices despite campaign pledges. Disillusionment grew as the economic empowerment narrative rang hollow. Economic conditions worsened for many farmers. The failure to deliver meaningful results became a stain on his record, exposing a disconnect between rhetoric and effective governance. In 2023, Kenya faced mass protests over new taxes and the rising cost of living. Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua publicly backed police brutality to suppress nationwide protests. His rhetoric portrayed peaceful demonstrators as anarchists, urging law enforcement to act firmly and decisively, and justifying a violent response. He praised police actions despite reports of excesses. This endorsement was seen as sanctioning police brutality, blurring the line between order and repression. The crackdown led to deaths and injuries, turning a political dispute into tragedy. Gachagua's actions revealed an authoritarian approach, prioritizing state power over citizens' rights and crushing opposition. In March 2023, as political tensions rose, a coordinated mob invaded Northlands Farm, owned by former President Uhuru Kenyatta's family. They felled trees, stole livestock, and set fire to the property. President Ruto, who was out of the country at the time of the invasion, condemned the lawlessness, but his deputy, Rigathi Gachagua, on whose watch the invasion happened, remained conspicuously silent. Gachagua's failure to condemn the violence was unsettling, especially given his past attacks against the Kenyatta family. Critics saw his silence as tacit approval, a violent extension of his rhetoric. The episode raised questions about the rule of law and protection of private property, suggesting a dangerous slide towards anarchy and politically motivated violence. The Northlands Farm invasion was more than just a security lapse. It was a masterclass in the politics of revenge, seemingly encouraged by the deputy president's posture. By refusing to condemn the lawlessness, Rigathi Gachagua was seen to be nurturing a dangerous form of populism, one that channels genuine economic frustration into destructive rage against a designated elite enemy. Gachagua's posture suggested a tacit approval of a new political doctrine, that the property and security of political opponents were forfeit. The government's apparent willingness to look the other way as a former head of state's property was plundered signaled that constitutional guarantees were conditional. The police force's failure to respond was not seen as incompetence, but of deliberate inaction. It normalized political violence and introduced a dangerous precedent into Kenya's already volatile political landscape. He showed that he was prepared to flirt with anarchy to settle personal scores, a reckless gamble that threatened to tear at the country's social fabric. In his quest to consolidate absolute political control over his Mount Kenya backyard, Rigathi Gachagua turned to one of the most feared and stigmatized words in the region's recent history, Mungiki. In mid-2023, as former Mungiki leader Maina Njenga began holding community dialogues and political meetings with youth across central Kenya, Gachagua launched an aggressive state-backed campaign to crush this nascent movement. He skillfully and deliberately framed Njenga's activities not as legitimate political mobilization, but as a dangerous resurgence of the notorious Mungiki sect, a proscribed criminal organization infamous for its past brutality, extortion rackets, and macabre rituals. This was a masterful and deeply cynical act of political branding. By labeling any youth gathering associated with Njenga as Mungiki, Gachagua weaponized the collective trauma and fear associated with the name. The Mungiki sect had terrorized central Kenya in the early 2000s, and the memory of their violence was still raw. The deputy president leveraged this historical stigma to delegitimize a political rival and any alternative Kikuyu voice that challenged his authority. It was a strategy designed to shut down political space, equating dissent with criminality and ensuring that any young person attending Njenga's meetings would be socially ostracized and marked as a potential terrorist. The state machinery was fully deployed to enforce this narrative. Gachagua publicly ordered police to outlaw Njenga's meetings, leading to a series of violent dispersals, mass arrests, and trumped-up charges against Nyenga and his followers. The crackdown was brutal and systematic. It was a clear message to the youth of Mount Kenya. Political loyalty to Gachagua was the only acceptable path. Any attempt to organize or associate with alternative centers of power would be met with the full force of the state. This was not just about maintaining law and order, it was a political purge, an ethnic cleansing of dissent within his own community, carried out under the convenient guise of a counter-terrorism operation. By equating all political opposition in his region with a violent criminal cult, he was poisoning the well of democratic discourse. He was not engaging with or debating his rivals. He was seeking to annihilate them politically by branding them with an indelible mark of criminality. This tactic, while effective in the short term for consolidating his grip on Mount Kenya politics, set a perilous precedent. It demonstrated his willingness to manipulate history and fear to silence any voice that dared to challenge his status as the undisputed regional kingpin. The campaign against Maina and Njenga was about silencing a generation of young people seeking a political identity. Gachagua was crushing any potential youth-led opposition movement. It was a calculated move to ensure his political dominance. This revealed Gachagua's insecurity. Instead of competing for the youth, he resorted to the power of the state. The arrests and intimidation were tools to enforce conformity. Political diversity was not tolerated. The Mungiki label tapped into a deep-seated fear of social disorder. Gachagua positioned himself as the strongman protector. This was a stark illustration of how Gachagua wielded state power. Any challenge was met with overwhelming force. Rigathi Gachagua's short but highly controversial tenure led to impeachment in the Kenyan Senate. The Kenyan president has a constitutional duty to embody national unity, and Rigathi Gachagua's own conduct made it increasingly untenable for President William Ruto to continue working with a deputy, a constitutional principal assistant, whose conduct consistently fostered ethnic division and national discord. After months of public outcry, an impeachment motion finally reached the floor. The trial was a moment of national reckoning. The grounds of impeachment painted a portrait of a leader who undermined the Constitution. It was a critical test for Kenya's democratic institutions. The charges included gross violation of the Constitution and inciting ethnic hatred. After days of debate, the Senate delivered its verdict. The Senate upheld 5 critical accusations, a stunning rebuke. This confirmed the worst fears of his critics. The trial left an indelible stain on his legacy. A central theme of the impeachment was the accusation that Rigathi Gachagua used his office as a shield and a cudgel against rivals. Evidence showed state institutions mobilized for personal agendas. The withdrawal of his corruption case after taking office showed how he used power as a shield. The Senate heard arguments on how he weaponized state agencies to punish opponents, like the crackdown on Maina and Njenga. Gachagua was accused of directing these operations, crushing dissent. Business leaders aligned with the previous administration faced tax audits and contract cancellations. The Senate's verdict affirmed that Gachagua viewed his position as a tool of power. His tenure became a case study in how a democratic office could be warped into personal vengeance. The impeachment vote emboldened Rigathi Gachagua. He launched a new, aggressive, and unapologetically tribal and divisive political campaign. He framed the impeachment as an attack on the entire Mount Kenya community, casting himself as a martyr. His post-impeachment strategy was built entirely on personal vengeance. He named his political enemies, promising a day of reckoning. He sought to create a siege mentality, urging the people of the larger Mount Kenya region to close ranks around him. The campaign was a masterclass in populist manipulation, centered on the supposed protection of Mount Kenya's dignity. The false narrative allowed him to deflect responsibility for his shortcomings and failures while in government. He offered them ethnic pride, a shared sense of persecution, with himself as their indispensable savior. It guarantees that ethnic divisions continue to fester, pushing Kenya deeper down a dangerous path of ethnic polarization. The ultimate legacy of Rigathi Gachagua's political career, encapsulated by the impeachment saga, is one of profound and lasting ethnic polarization and division. His time in the national spotlight has left deep scars on the Kenyan body politic, exacerbating ethnic tensions to a degree not seen in years. His relentless focus on mobilizing his own community, often at the expense of national unity, has reinforced the dangerous notion that politics in Kenya is a zero-sum ethnic census. He has consistently prioritized the false grievances and ambitions of one region above the collective good of the nation. a strategy that has yielded him personal power but has severely damaged the country's social fabric. Public discourse has become coarser, more confrontational, and more polarized under his influence. The shareholding doctrine, the weaponization of the Mungiki label, and the constant framing of politics as a battle between us and them have poisoned the well of democratic debate. The judiciary, the police, and the prosecution service have all been drawn into his personal political dramas, weakening their standing in the eyes of the public. This erosion of institutional integrity is a grave threat to democracy, as it undermines the very guardrails that are meant to protect citizens from the abuse of power and ensure the rule of law. Ultimately, Gachagua's legacy is a tale of how one individual's ambition can threaten a nation's democratic progress. He has demonstrated that it is possible to rise to the highest levels of power not by uniting people, but by expertly dividing them. The scars of this division are not merely political, they are social and psychological, fostering mistrust and resentment among communities. As Kenya moves forward, it will have to grapple with the consequences of Gachagua's divisive leadership, a legacy that serves as a stark reminder of the fragility of national unity and the constant vigilance required to protect it from those who would sacrifice it for personal gain. The political trajectory of Rigathi Gachagua serves as a cautionary tale for Kenya, extending beyond a single man's actions. His time in power illustrates how democratic office can be twisted into a tool for ethnic dominance and erosion of constitutional norms. Gachagua's rise represents a perilous regression for a nation that has shed blood for multi-partyism. His legacy is a reminder that democracy requires constant defense. Gachagua's playbook provides a dangerous blueprint for aspiring authoritarians. This challenges the Kenyan project, which envisions a diverse society governed by equity. The Gachagua phenomenon reflects deep-seated ethnic fissures. His tenure has been a stress test for Kenya's democracy, revealing both its resilience and fragility. It is a story about the consequences of unchecked political ambition, leaving behind a stark warning of how quickly progress can be undone. As Kenya looks towards the next electoral cycle in 2027, the nation stands at a critical crossroads, and the questions raised by Rigathi Gachagua's tenure loom large over its future. Will Kenyans choose leaders who seek to unite a diverse nation, or will they reward those who divide them for political gain? The Gachagua experience has made the stakes crystal clear. It has demonstrated that leadership rooted in ethnic chauvinism inevitably leads to a weaker, more fractured country. The alternative is leadership that embraces constitutionalism, respects independent institutions, and actively works to heal the nation's divisions. This requires voters to look beyond tribal champions and demand accountability, integrity, and a vision for every Kenyan. It is a call to reject the cynical politics of the past and demand a higher standard of governance. Politicians' promises should be measured against their track records. The fight against the Gachagua brand of politics is a duty for every Kenyan who believes in a united, prosperous, and democratic future. It is a battle for the heart of the nation, fought in community halls, on social media, and at the ballot box. Kenyans must ask themselves the hard questions. Are we a nation of chauvinist ethnic shareholders or a republic of equal citizens? Do we want leaders who build bridges or burn them? Rigathi Gachagua's time has been a red flag, a warning of the dangers ahead. Whether Kenya heeds this warning and chooses unity and progress, or continues down the road of ethnic division and decay, will define its destiny for generations. The choice rests with the people. Like and share this video with your friends, subscribe to our channel, and drop a comment to let us know which Kenyan politician you'd like us to discuss next. We're here on a serious mission to let the truth speak louder than the propaganda.